So, welcome everybody to another wonderful opportunity to learn more about cultivating self-kindness for World Kindness Day 2022. I have the privilege of introducing one of my most extraordinary teachers that has changed my life, the wonderful Chris Germer. Chris is a clinical psychologist and part-time lecturer of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. He co-developed the Mindful Self-Compassion program with Kristen Neff in 2010. And MSc has since taught over 200,000 people worldwide. They co-authored 2 books on MSc, the Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook and Teaching the Mindful Self-Compassion Program, which I highly recommend. Chris spends most of his time lecturing and leading workshops around the world on mindfulness and self-compassion. He is the author of The Mindful Path to Self-Compassion. He co-edited 2 influential volumes on therapy, mindfulness and psychotherapy, and wisdom and compassion in psychotherapy. And he maintains a small private practice in Arlington, Massachusetts, USA. So a very, very warm welcome to you, Chris.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Barbara. I'm just so happy to be here with you.
Thank you so much for being with us. It's really very close to our heart. And the topic you're going to be speaking on is shame, because I know that this is a topic that you have been studying and developing and exploring. And I know there's a new course that you've just begun, which I'm very excited to learn more about. So, Barbara, I think we'll over to you for our first question, and fingers on buzzers, Chris.
Oh, so wonderful to have you with us, Chris, for this World Kindness Day. So we know that you're passionate about shame, you're teaching it, you're researching it, you're writing about it. So why is shame, what is shame, and why is it so important for us to understand?
Yeah, well, the best way to understand what shame is in contrast to guilt. And guilt basically means I made a mistake, whereas shame means I am a mistake. So shame is kind of a self-attack. Actually, whenever we feel shame, there's some attack on the self, either from us or from somebody else. But it's also a social emotion, which means it's kind of like I'm imagining in my mind what you're imagining about me, and it's not good. So there's a kind of a harshness and a self-criticism involved in shame. Yeah. And that's really the opposite of self-compassion, you know. Self-compassion is about inner support, inner encouragement, and so forth.
Because the impact of shame can be so debilitating, can't it?
Well, yeah, it can. I mean, mostly we don't even know how shame is impacting us. Shame is mostly an invisible emotion. We're often critical of ourselves in just a kind of unaware way. It's just sort of going through our minds and really holding us back, keeping us from being fully human, keep us from being authentic. There's a kind of a quality of not really there-ness about how shame holds us back. But it can also be very debilitating. Shame is associated with just about every psychiatric diagnosis that we have: anxiety, depression, substance abuse, even psychosis, either as a cause for these difficulties or as a consequence because of all the stigma with mental health. So shame has a huge cost. Actually, there's a cost that every one of us pays, you know. So it really behooves us to do something about it. As the great Paul Gilbert in the United Kingdom says, about problems like shame, it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. We can and should do something about it.
So I'm guessing shame is a huge barrier to bringing self-compassion and self-kindness into our lives and stopping us from actually embodying a sense of kindness for ourselves and for others. Can you talk a little bit about how we can perhaps melt the edges, soften around the edges of that?
Yeah. Well, so first of all, shame is really the opposite of self-compassion. When Kristen Neff defined self-compassion, she said it consists of mindfulness, common humanity, and self-kindness. But the opposite of mindfulness is kind of self-absorption. The opposite of common humanity is isolation. The opposite of self-kindness is self-criticism. And those qualities, kind of a self-absorbed sense of isolation with self-criticism, are really key factors in of shame. So when Kristen offered us a definition of self-compassion, she was really talking about the opposite, you know. So the question was, how do we soften around the edges? The interesting thing is that when we're kind to ourselves, even if we don't know that we're suffering from shame, we actually can address shame. Actually, shame gets alleviated whether we know we're suffering from shame or not. The cool thing is that when we actually know that shame is a problem for us, we can do it more, consciously and explicitly, and chances are that it's even more effective because we have a target.
I'm thinking about those moments that people sometimes describe shame like, I felt like, sinking into the ground or disappearing. That real sense of withdrawal. And so can you elaborate a little bit more about how we might work with moments of shame that we're either really deeply affected by at the time, or we might be oblivious to?
Yeah. So what you were just describing as one of the key kind of expressions of shame is this disappearing, to go small, go silent, or go away. But that's one of the many manifestations. So really the first part of working with shame is mindfulness of shame. That is to say, knowing that we're feeling shame while we're feeling it. And so shame has so many different manifestations. For some people, it's a kind of physical sensation like tension or blushing. So for others, more psychological, like a sense of self-criticism or worthlessness. For others, shame masquerades as a different emotion. When some people are feeling ashamed, that all they feel is anger or sadness, So there are many different manifestations, but the first is to actually know shame when it's happening. So that's mindfulness of shame. Then the second step is to really remember that shame is a universal human emotion. Most of us, when we feel shame, we feel so isolated and alone. In fact, one could say you actually probably not feeling shame if you don't feel isolated and alone. It's part of what it means to feel shame. But in that moment, to remember that shame is a universal human emotion, that just about everyone in the world feels it, and we're all born with the capacity for shame. And then the last part is kindness, to actually give ourselves the kindness that we need. In other words, to talk to ourselves in a way that we would like to be spoken with, or that we might talk to somebody else in a moment of shame. The irony is that when somebody else feels shame, usually it just kind of melts our heart, and we give them encouragement. We show, kindness and touch and in the tone of our voices. But when we feel shame, exactly the opposite, So, mindfulness, part one, a sense of common humanity, part two, and part three is self-kindness. But you know what, Barbara, all of this is really based on a deeper understanding of the origin of shame or the motivation behind shame. And what the motivation is actually, shame comes from the universal wish to be loved. If we didn't wish to be loved, we wouldn't feel horrified at the thought that we were not loved, and this wish has been with us since birth. And when we can actually connect with that primordial wish, we actually can get underneath shame and we can feel our innocence. And when we feel our innocence, then we actually are way more likely to be compassionate with ourselves. So I would say, it's good. We need to have awareness of shame. We need to see the common humanity of shame. We need to be kind to ourselves. But what actually enables all that to happen, what throws the door open to this kind of compassionate response, is to understand that shame arises from the wish to be loved, to connect with our primordial innocence and the primordial hunger and longing that we all have for kindness. Because then when it doesn't happen, we don't get caught up in it so much. We can actually see that whole arising of shame and then slip through it and actually give ourselves the love we need. It's a subtle thing, but it's profound.
I think it changes everything, doesn't it, when we acknowledge, I just want to be part of the group. I just want them to like me. I want to feel like I belong. And all of that can, if we don't feel that, we can just feel so desperately alone and isolated. And it's so interesting when you say we just open our arms to others if they're struggling with that, but we do the opposite with ourselves. It's cruel.
Oh, and it's cruel, yeah.
So true.
If we treated others the way we treat ourselves, we wouldn't have any friends, as I say,
Yes,
especially
exactly.
in a moment of shame.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm.
So, this is all well and good. I can hear people saying, well, this is all very interesting, Chris, but how do I change this if I am struggling with this? And I know, as you say, everyone on the planet will be, to varying degrees, have met shame and struggled with shame in different ways. So this is Chris's top tips now as to how we can, on World Kindness Day, move a little bit closer to being kind to ourselves, cultivating this kindness and compassion for ourselves so that we can change our relationship with maybe those feelings of shame.
Yeah. Well, I think what's important to know is that self-compassion practice is not only mental training. In other words, not just loving kindness meditation or something like that, but actually we have, 16, 18 hours a day in which we're behaving and, moving around in the world and not necessarily meditating. And how do we treat ourselves then? And so behavioral self-compassion or self-compassion in daily life is really important. So if we want to reverse the negative impact of shame in our lives, as I said before, the most important thing is to know that we're feeling shame while we're feeling it. That's probably 50% of the whole thing. And then to respond in a new way. That is to say, to respond with kindness and compassion. But usually in a moment of shame, we're really not able to do that because we're just so caught up in, kind of automatic thoughts and behaviors. The thought of like, oh, Catherine, or oh, Chris, maybe you can be a little kinder to yourself right now, hardly occurs to us. And if it does occur to us, we often don't know what to do. So what to do? So the invitation is that when we notice we're feeling shame, first thing is to ask ourselves, how could I treat myself in a kind way behaviorally? And to do that, we need to break it down a little so that we can actually have an answer to that question. And so there are a few questions you could ask, such as, Well, how would I treat a friend who's feeling just as I am feeling now? Or how would I treat a friend who's feeling shame like I'm feeling? So that's one way of doing it. The other way is to ask yourself, what do I need? What do I need? And there are so many different kinds of ways of responding. What do I need to physically comfort myself, physically soothe myself, to emotionally comfort myself? What do I need to validate myself? Maybe I should do a little journaling or talk to a friend. What do I need to protect myself? Maybe I'm experiencing shame because somebody said some racist comment in the clothing store or something, and I need in my spirit to be able to say no. This is not acceptable, or even physically to say that. Or what do I need to provide for myself, or what do I need to motivate myself? So what do I need, and how would I treat a friend? But another question is, how do I care for myself already? So when we're not in moments of shame, we're often really good to ourselves in some way, like we might exercise, or we might get enough sleep, or we might read some uplifting books. If we can do for ourselves what we already know how to do for ourselves in a moment of shame, that's a revolutionary act. And the beautiful thing is if we do it once, we experience the benefit of it. It becomes self-reinforcing. And then we could do it twice and 3 times. And slowly, the skill of self-compassion grows, and the grip of shame recedes.
I love that. Thank you. I know you mentioned that we might be able to have a little practice or be guided through a way in which we can tend to ourselves. Would this be a good time?
Well, yeah, we could do that. So there is a practice called the self-compassion break, which I was actually alluding to before with Barbara. And so even in this moment right now, if you can think of a time when you might have felt some shame, maybe you, I don't know, overreacted to something, or maybe you're embarrassed because your child misbehaved at school or something mild. If you can bring to mind a difficulty, time when you felt some shame, and then just to notice how that feels in your body. And then just be able to name that for yourself in a kind way, like, oh, shame, this is shame. I'm feeling shame. And maybe even notice where it is in your body, and in particular, where it is in your body, and just allowing it to be there for a moment, because it's part of the human condition. Everyone feels shame. Actually, you're not alone when you feel shame. Other people in the same situation, particularly those in your own community with your own identities, might know exactly what you're feeling and have been through the same thing. So part 2 is to remember that we're not so alone. We're in a moment of shame, even though it feels so lonely. And then part 3 is kindness, and we can offer that to ourselves in a variety of ways. For example, you can take your hand and put it over on the part of your body that might be holding shame. Maybe shame is felt as a contraction in the heart region or tightness in the jaw. So you can just put a hand over that part of your body as an expression of kindness. You can even gently rub that part of your body. So this is physical kindness, physical kindness. And you can even imagine, if somebody were to walk into my room right now and say something to me that I really need to hear at a time like this, what would those words be? Maybe the words would be, I'm so sorry you're feeling this way. I love you. You're a good person. I'm here for you. I've got your back. You can do this. You're strong. Words of kindness. And then what would those words be for you? And then to have the courage to actually allow those words to roll through your mind. Right? In other words, offering yourself kindness in the form of language and in the form of touch, maybe keeping your hand over that part of your body. And noticing how it feels in your body when you are kind to yourself, rather than the usual ways that we respond to ourselves in a moment of shame. So if your eyes are closed, you can open them again and know that anytime you feel shame, if you're able to say, hey, this is shame, you can name it for yourself. You can remind yourself that you're not alone and bring kindness to yourself in some form. Or you can just do one of those things. Doesn't matter. 50% of the game is knowing it when you're feeling it and having the wish to bring kindness to yourself. The rest is details.
Oh, thank you so much, Chris, for all of that and for the practice. And that really practical strategy that people can take away. And we're hearing that the key thing is naming the shame, is recognizing it. And I was thinking that even that's quite a difficult thing to initially get the hang of, but we can sometimes reflect, can't we, and think, oh, you know, half an hour ago, that's what happened. And we can practice that technique in our head, you know, like this is something we can rehearse, and then it will gradually, hopefully, come to us at the time.
That's a really good point. So first of all, name it and you tame it, but when it's most intense, we probably cannot name it. But as you said, at some point it'll start to subside if you can name it then. Catch it now. Maybe next time you catch it a little sooner. That's a great point, Barbara. Thank you for saying that.
Thank you so much. I'm going to just pass back over to Catherine now.
Thanks, Barbara. Thank you so much, Chris. I'm very sad to say we need to draw this wonderful time together to a close. For those people watching that would really like to learn more about your work and all the incredible transformational offerings that you have and you created in the world, what's the best way for them to get to know you a little bit or contact you?
Well, I have a website, chrisgermer.com. If somebody wants to contact me, you can do it through the website. For more information on self-compassion practice in general, you could go to the centerformsc.org. Or to Chris and Neff's website, or to Catherine Lovell's website.
Love that. Give me a quick plug. Thank you.
There are many options out there, but I sure appreciate I sure appreciate everybody's interest in self-compassion. It's a resource which we're all sitting on. It's like gold, and we don't know we're sitting on it. We just have to remind ourselves. And we just need to give ourselves permission to be self-compassionate, and it'll change your life.
Well, that sounds a wonderful note to round off, Chris, and we just thank you so much. And on behalf of all the participants here today, that's just been such a wonderfully rich and touching conversation. So many, many thanks.
Yes,
Thanks to you both, and also for doing this World Kindness Day. We need it now more than ever. It's so important. Thank you so much.
Thank you ever so much, Chris. And we'll make sure that all the relevant information about everything that you're offering is in the notes and on the website, so people can find you with ease. Thank you very much for your time and sharing your expertise with the world.
Thanks. It was a pleasure.
Take care.
Really appreciate your time. Lovely seeing you, Chris, and being with you. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Ciao, ciao.
Go well. Go well.